Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Anyone heard of Siguanaba? Gramps got chased by her one night after drinking and after refusing to sleep with her. 10 out 10 to negative nope in 5 seconds. I guess she's like a shapeshifter. She appears as whatever type of girl you're into. People who have encountered this thing are forever batshit crazy and just on loop about the night it happened, but can't finish telling you what happened. After turning down her advances, he runs through the jungle. He's from El Salvador and he lived in a rural part where it was primarily thick jungles and steep hills. So he's tripping and running cause for all he knows, Satan is about to eat him. He swears he ran like a mile until he didn't hear anything but his own movement in the bushes. A bird starts to make this funny noise and it sounds like CPTU. It's supposed to be a bad omen if you hear that. He looks up. It's dark but moonlight is enough to light the high branches. A pygmy-looking child-sized grown man with a fleshy hat is crouching on branch above him. Yellow big eyes. Noped his almost sober ass out of there. Comes home tired and vomits for a day. To this day he swears it was something evil after him. He had the gut feeling that if he accepted his fate that night then things would have turned out differently, but he's glad he got out of that shit. Oh, I have another story about the time he lost his favorite horse to a demon. I guess shit like this was common back in his day. My mom has seen some sick stuff too. My family was in the shitstorm of the Civil War, so I have more stories about spoopy witchcraft, murders, war crimes, and there was tons of times that my mother and her siblings had to dig up corpses that were half-assed dug into the ground in their own backyard. Opus here again. This story I'm going to tell you is about this popular demon-like entity that is known as La Careta Chillona, which translates to the squeaky cart. Lol, I know it's dumb, but anyways, it was supposedly made up to make kids go to sleep or else it will come to your house and rip your head off through the window. One nice sunny and humid day in El Salvador. Grandpa came home from a long trip to the city from selling veggies on horse. The horse was old, but obedient and smart as hell. I'm not kidding you, this horse would attack if he saw you getting Grandpa's gym as rustled. It was a beautiful day with no clouds in the sky. From a distance you can hear someone's dogs barking. They won't STFU. It's around 4 p.m. The village nearby sounds like a ton of animals being tortured and shrieking in pain. Family is outside like WTF was that? No more noise. Then they go inside. Half an hour passes and every animal on their farm is going bonkers. There was this ear-splitting screech as though it was some sort of metal. Grandpa goes to see the horses. The smart one is gone, but the saddle and shit he had on is on the ground. The other horse has a huge gash from his forehead to his nose like an axe hit him. They think it was that squeaky cart demon thing.
Be a 16-year-old high school student from New Jersey visiting his family in El Salvador. It's New Year's and a lot of my family members are at my uncle's house in Ahuachapan. We're all having a good time and then my uncle gathers all the kids together. He says he's going to tell us a ghost story, but I'm a cocky American, I don't care. He tells us about the lady in white and says that she's been haunting the house since he's been there and even says he's talked to her. He also tells us that he bought the house ridiculously cheap and wondered why. I don't give a care and think it's a hoax. Immediately I started making fun of these women in white and put a white cloth over myself. Begin scaring everyone at the house throughout the night. Eventually it's time to go to bed and all the adults go into different rooms and the kids decide to sleep on the floor by the kitchen. It's about 2 a.m. and I fall asleep. I wake up to a really cold breeze and notice that the door to the backyard is open. This might not seem crazy to some of you, but in El Salvador the doors are heavy and made of metal because of all the violence. I woke my cousin up and told him to go close the door. He says okay. I try to go back to sleep and I hear a terrified screech. My cousin comes running back and claims he saw the lady in white. At the time, I was very superstitious and didn't believe absolutely anything he was saying. Tell him to go close the door so I can go to sleep. He says that he wouldn't go again unless I would come with him. I saw okay just because I wanted him to shut up. We wake up to the door in order to close it and I see something. It's a woman. She's all dressed in white and she's not transparent at all. She's completely solid and she walks across the yard about 25 feet away from me. My cousin and I flip out and start screaming. Everyone in the house wakes up and runs out of their room to see what's going on. We tell them what happened and they're in disbelief kinda. I didn't know if they believed us or not, but they look worried. My uncle told us not to mess with her ever, and it was the creepiest moment of my life. Eventually all the kids get out of the kitchen and sleep in rooms where their parents were. I couldn't sleep because of all the shit that happened. About half an hour later I heard loud noises coming from outside the room. My father asks my mother, "Do you hear that? What's going on?" We hear plates being thrown and breaking. It was a very clear sound. My dad gets up and slowly gets out of the room just to see his brothers coming out at the same time. I come out because of curiosity and see them walk towards the kitchen. Literally nothing there. No broken plates, no broken anything. My dad tells my mom to pack our bags because there was no way we were staying there. Leave for a motel about 30 minutes away from town. That was probably one of the craziest things to ever happen in my life. It might seem unbelievable, but I swear it happened.
Be visiting Grandma's house in El Salvador. Lots of nightlife out there. It's also pitch black because no street lights. Have to go take a piss. Walk down towards the bathroom, which is its own building for whatever reason. Floor is tile, and I dunno, I guess to comfort myself I used to kind of skip so my feet would always slap the tile. Get to the bathroom and open the door. I hear slapping. What.jpg? Someone else is skipping down the hall. Hear what kind of sounds like my little cousin's voice asking me if I want water or to go to the water or some shit. Can't really speak or understand Yucatec too well. What are you talking about, Gabriel? My face when there's someone much too tall to be my cousin standing in the grass. My face when this guy repeats in near perfect mimicry of my cousin's voice. Do you want to come to the water? No, what the actual? Scream for dad. Dad freaks out. Guy is still telling me to go towards the water or if I want water. Dad runs out and sees the guy and starts screaming. Grandpa starts lecturing me in Yucatec about how I need to let out blood to purify the evil that taints me. Grandpa starts telling me all sorts of shit about how it won't go away until I do the ritual. My face when Dad tells Grandpa off and flies me back to the States. Haven't been back since, but I never could forget that night. If you haven't figured it out, my grandparents are very in tune with our Mayan heritage. They help clean the local temple and keep it restored and all that. Some creepy stuff has happened near the temple sites and stuff, but I dunno if you guys want more. Being forced to clean the temple, after once again being forced to follow morning rituals, and yet again having to dress traditionally for festivals I don't care about. Go clean the temple interior. Dust the halls and polish the idols. God damn it. I hate this job. You have no idea how dusty these temples get. Head in and start dusting. Realize that someone in the day staff, or maybe some tourist done moved one of the little clay doll idols. Remember all these stories about how it's great disrespect to let them just fall face flat. The halls are bigger, I'll save that for last. My face when I start hearing goats bleeding. What? Hear muffled Yucatec. Sounds kinda like Grandpa. Hear the sound of stone scraping. Recognize that as the front door nope.jpg. Book it towards the door because I'm a panicky teenage boy. Door is open but there's overgrowth everywhere. What? The jungle isn't this dense. Too scared to step out. Hear more weird noises. Bleeding, hooting, all kinds of weird noises and shit. Run back inside. Stone scraping sound is still there. Run faster and I get lightheaded. Wake up in the main office. I had been gone for nearly 3 hours. Grandpa found me in one of the halls. Clay idol was chilling in the hallway entrance.
Guirola Mansion, El Salvador. Big, early 20th century mansion in what was an enormous coffee plantation owned by one of the country's richest families, part of the ruling oligarchy, the Guirolas. Heavily rumored that they made a satanic pact in order to continue being filthy rich. Supposedly plantation workers disappeared on a monthly basis as payment for the devil. Weird sights and unexplained phenomena happen at night. The family suddenly is in deep trouble because of the sudden fall of coffee prices. Sudden deaths and diseases and shit like that in the family, still filthy rich. Their lineage dwindles and disappears nominally. House ends up in the hands of some non-blood kin of the family. They sell the lands of the former plantation and leave the house abandoned. Nowadays what was once the former plantation is now part of the capital city due to urban expansion. 2001, devastating earthquake. Suburbs that occupied the hills that once were the plantation are wiped off the face of the earth by an ungodly landslide. The Guirola Mansion stands untouched. Collective National WTF.jpg. There are still strange sightings and the house is off bounds and derelict by now.
Bime. I live in El Salvador. Parents own a house in a ghetto. The people we rented the house to haven't paid in 6 months. Parents tell me to go there and check out the house to see if there's people still living in it, and if I can, collect the rent. Screw that .jpg. I eventually go. The place is empty. Graffiti all over the place. Nobody in the streets. Everything is eerily quiet at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. There should be children running around, women cooking stuff, men playing cards, anything really. Finally get to the house. Knock for 5 minutes, nobody answers. Open the door with a spare key. The stench of rotting food in the clogged toilet makes me feel instantly nauseous. Trash all over the place. As I'm checking the last room in the house, hear some voices. Translating from ghetto Spanish.
Hey, looks like somebody came here.
Shit, could it be the cops?
Nah man, they know the deal, this is somebody else.
Hey yo, we know you're here. We're gonna cap your sorry ass for coming here.
I could feel my soul leaving my body. Hear how they were checking each room. Notice some dirty rags in a corner. Screw it, my life is in danger. Cover myself with the rags. Turns out there's some blankets and curtains here. They must have been using them to wipe themselves and clean their puke. Curl into a ball and hope God saves me. See a guy coming in with a revolver. Looks around a little bit, even kicks another mound of rags on the other corner.
Shit, house is clean, bro. Ain't nobody here.
I can feel my soul coming back to my body. Thank God Almighty.
Alright, let's pop this fucker.
Hear a single shot. Hear like 5 people running out in the alley. Stand up, shaking like a Reddit mod at a playground. Walk into the living room. There was a guy with a shot in his head, bleeding out. Nope.jpg. Run to my car as fast as I can. GTFO of there. Never go back to that house.
/x/ I think my family has a supernatural history. This story involves 2 parts. My life, and my grandfather's. I'll start with my grandfather. Grandfather is from El Salvador. He was a millionaire. Died in the Civil War and the government took all his money, so now my family is just normal. Anyways, apparently he was into the occult. My mother and aunts won't tell me anything about it. Have no info and can't find any proof to this claim. Cousins once found his old books. Found legit satanic books. Book about demonology, the occult, really freaky shit. Showed it to my grandmother and asked what it was. MFW, she burned all of them immediately. She acted surprised when we found it. Like we weren't supposed to. A lot of people in El Salvador recognize my family name and hate us. Because of this, a lot of people tried sabotaging our family. Some of these attempts were done through supernatural means. Curses, voodoo dolls, spells, occult shit, summoning demons. My family refuses to talk about it. The family refuses to tell me why they were hated so much. It's probably because they were rich. But could my grandfather use supernatural means to attain his wealth? Maybe he researched it to defend his family.
So this particular encounter will require some backstory. My apologies if it is a bit long-winded. Both of my parents were born and raised in the same small village in El Salvador. It's really far out in the countryside at the end of a dirt road. The village is called La Aldea in the Calatenango region of the country. Like many other countries, we have our share of folklore and supernatural beings, the most famous being La Siguanaba. She has many origin stories. The one I heard was that she married the devil himself and gave birth to a wicked offspring. But for all intents and purposes, anytime anything happened that seemed paranormal or unexplainable, it was credited to La Siguanaba. My parents took me and my sister down to visit both of their families around the time I was 7 or 8, 1989 or 1990. We were staying at the home my mother grew up in and staying with my Abuelita, a grandmother, and some of my tias, aunts, and tios, uncles. My mother was one of 12 kids, and this was their family home. It was not built for that many kids growing up. The village itself was rather poor. One night early during the trip, my Abuelita made her way down to the church in the village for weekly mass along with a few other relatives. Others stayed behind and just hung out in front of the house. We were between a chain link fence and the front door. About an hour and a half later, I would say about 8 p.m. or so, many of us, myself, my mother, some cousins, aunts, and uncles, saw my Abuelita walking back from church on the one road of the village. She walked into the front yard through the fence and into the open front door. We all greeted her as she walked past us, but I cannot remember if she greeted us back. We found nothing odd about the situation at all. About 5 minutes later, my Abuelita was walking through the fence accompanied by the same family members she went to church with earlier in the evening. Needless to say, we were all very confused. All the family that stayed behind asked my Abuelita how she got back to the church without us noticing her. The only other entrance to the house was a door to one of the 2 bedrooms, and it was also on the front of the house where we all would have seen her. She proceeded to inform us that Mass had just ended and they had just left the church. She was just as confused as we were. As soon as those words left her mouth, we all started screaming it was La Siguanaba. When we saw the doppelganger, we didn't feel any sort of unease dread. Or at least I didn't. But the fact that this was a group experience shared with a bunch of family makes it all the wilder. This is one that I'll always remember.
I used to live in a small city, where our next-door neighbor was the worst ever. My grandmother never told us why this lady next door hated her so much. She sure got revenge at whatever the grudge was, but she was nice to us. Until this day, I do not know why. My aunt came home from school very hungry. The lady next door was outside on the porch, when all of a sudden she asked her to come and help her get something out, because it was too heavy. As my aunt proceeded to go help her, I tried to stop her, but I was pushed by an unseen force. I did not see anybody by the door at the time. I ran to my grandmother to let her know what was going on, but it was too late. By the time we went to get her, she was already coming out with a sandwich in her hand. My grandmother took it away from her, but she was almost done with it. The same night, around midnight, we were awakened by the smell of something burning. I woke everybody up to help find where the smell was coming from. It was my aunt's room. I could not open the door, but when my uncle came in, the look on his face was as if he had seen the devil himself. I grabbed his hand, and he snapped out of it. But when I turned to see who or what he was staring at, it was the scariest thing I had ever seen. My aunt was sitting in her bed, just staring at me. Her facial features were as if a demon inside of her were trying to come out. For the next few days she became worse. It started by her passing out, and all the entities she had inside tried to come through. A little girl, a man, a few demons, and one that called himself the devil. I was so scared to be alone with her, but every time that she passed out she was next to me. The little spirit tried to come through every time I was in front of her, but there was one entity that did not like me one bit. One day I was passing next to my aunt, not knowing that she was in her possessed mode. I guess you can say. When all of a sudden she grabbed me. Her face was not hers, but that demon that did not like me. I say this because she sounds like an evil man. I screamed so hard I almost passed out. My grandmother called my uncles to get her or this thing off me. She pulled me closer and told me that he knew who I was and to watch myself, because one day I would not be so lucky. I went to church and became a regular choir boy. I told our priest what was going on, and he offered to help. He gave me a little bottle of holy water to protect myself. The very next day he came to our house but made it only to our door, saying, "I cannot come in there. It is too strong for me. I need more people with me." He told my grandma that one of the demons was not just a demon but the devil himself, and that he was not going anywhere without my aunt. He said that as he was leaving, he heard the entity scream at him, saying that her soul was offered to him, and he was going to stay until he got her soul. He was so concerned that he came the very next day with 3 other people. They failed, and she stayed the same. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Yes, this went on for 2 years. It was an everyday nightmare. I still do not know how she got cured. None of my family members would tell me how. But I cannot be alone with her to this day. I feel as if the demon that threatened me is still with her, and I am afraid of her. I know she has a family now, but I'm still afraid.
When I was younger, and beginning my rebellious phase, my parents sent me to El Salvador, my country of origin, to straighten up. Of course, it was a vacation for me. I was 14. My older sister was 15, as was my youngest uncle. My grandparents live in a small village where everyone knows each other. Things are very simple over there. Women should not be out alone after dark type of thing. One night one of my older uncles, his name is Ronald, and his girlfriend, Jasmine, were going out to the center late at night around 11 p.m., and they took my sister, Edith, my youngest uncle, Christian, and I with them. In the center there were usually buses parked in a row. These are the buses that take people from the village to a more major bus stop where they can easily catch another bus to get to the big cities. So all three of us were just running around the buses when we noticed a kid that looked around the same age as us, dressed in all black, running away from us. Then we saw another kid, but this one was dressed in all white running after the other one dressed in black. They looked like they were playing tag. We of course got curious and decided to investigate a bit more, but we just couldn't keep up with them and kept losing them. So we thought we would just walk in front of all the buses to see where they were. As we were walking down, we saw both of them come out and run across the street and jump over a border leading to a women's house. I can't explain it, but houses over there aren't like here. Most people spend their days outside, so most houses have a patio in the front of their home with a cement border so you can't see if someone is ducking in that area. So we decided we would go see them since they were ducking behind the border and hadn't come out yet, and there was nowhere else for them to hide. But when we got there, there was no one there. We were all surprised and ran back to tell Ronald, my older uncle. He laughed it off, but he did tell my grandma. I never found an explanation for this. There are a lot of stories of kids dying there in the center. My grandma is very religious and believes in spirits. She explained it as just spirits of kids joining in our game. Kids that just wanted to play with us, but who knows? This happened to my grandfather and I in El Salvador. When I was 8 years old on a Saturday night. We were coming back from visiting relatives who lived up the mountain from us. About an hour and a half to a 2-hour hike. During the day it is a beautiful hiking place, but at night it is quite scary. We ended up leaving my uncle's place later than we thought, at about 8 p.m., but we were not worried since we had done this hike hundreds of times at all times of the day, but never after 10 p.m. According to locals, it is not safe to be out there after 10 p.m. because of weird things that they have seen and heard. Thankfully we were prepared for nightfall. We had our own flashlight. Grandpa had a huge flashlight that was as bright as a headlight on a car. And our backpack had bottles of water and snacks. Well, halfway into our way back home was pretty scary. There was no moonlight, so it was really dark, and only trees all around and a few homes here and there. We heard noises and other weird things, but since we were in the middle of the mountains, we dismissed it and kept walking. About a mile away from home things got very weird and spooky. We couldn't even hear a cricket sound, everything just went silent. At this point my grandfather grabbed my hand and told me to stay close. I remember getting scared and worried. I looked at my watch and it was 9:15 p.m. I told Grandpa and he said not to worry, we were almost home. I kept pointing my flashlight in front of me so I wouldn't step on something or trip over. Then about 20 feet from us was this huge tree and it had a bough on it, which I thought was strange, and so did my grandpa, as he replied with, "Well, that's interesting, a bough on a tree." Then to our surprise a woman wearing a gray or light blue dress, I don't really remember, was standing on the other side of the tree but with her back to us. I told my grandpa why she would be out at this time of the night by herself. He said maybe she is lost or hurt, so we hurried to see if she needed help. We were about 10 feet away from her when she started walking, so Grandpa yells, "Hey, excuse me miss, are you okay? Are you lost?" No answer. "Do you need help?" Again no answer, she just kept walking. After you pass the tree with the bough about 5 to 10 feet, you go down the hill onto an open space with a few trees here and there and pretty flowers everywhere with a walking trail next to it. Standing on the bottom of the hill in front of the trail, Grandpa turned to me and said, "Come on honey, we got to hurry, I don't think she's okay." He only turns to me for about a second or two, and when we turn back she disappears. We could not find her, we looked everywhere and no luck. There was no way she could have run that fast. The trail is pretty long and little trees scatter around, nowhere to hide even if you wanted to. Since Grandpa had a big flashlight, we had a good view of the landscape all around us, but we saw nothing. We kept walking and still looking, hoping to find her and help her, but no luck. Once we reached the town, I looked at my watch and it was 10:15 p.m. I told Grandpa how happy I was that we had made it just in time out of the mountains, yet still worried about what had happened to that lady. The next day Grandpa told a neighbor of our incident with the strange woman, and he interrupted my grandfather and said, "Are you talking about the big tree right before you go down the hill?" Grandpa said yes. Why? Our neighbor called his wife Susan over and began to tell us about a murder that happened in that area. On the Thursday of that week, a lady was walking home at around 8 p.m. or so when she came across a man who tried to rob her, and since she fought back he stabbed her 4 times and she bled to death. She was found at the bottom of the hill the next morning. The killer was caught the next day drunk with a bloody shirt and hands with a knife in his pocket. People thought he was hurt, but when they heard of the murder they turned him in and he did confess. My grandfather turned white and I didn't know what to say at all, but felt so bad for her. The neighbor's wife Susan said that we were not the only ones that have seen her. A few locals have seen her walk from the tree to the bottom of the hill where her spirit always walks back and forth. The bough on the tree was put there on her behalf. After that day Grandpa asked if I wanted to go with him to leave flowers for her. Though I was a little scared at first, I agreed. When we were walking up the hill to the tree, Grandpa grabbed my hand and asked to pray for her. After leaving the flowers and sending our prayers for her, we returned home. My grandparents say that until this day people still see her at times. I just hope that one day she's able to move on and cross over to be at peace.
I was just turning 17 and started college. For some reason I had decided to go to college in El Salvador. I had problems with my boarding, so I ended up going to this small place called Guazapa with one of my college friends. Once there I was staying with her, but I found out that about 10 minutes walking distance from her house there was rooms for rent, and the best part was that for a single person the room was $30 a month with water and light included. For me this sounded awesome, so I moved in. Well, a couple of months passed and there was something not right about the room. I could not sleep in the day. There was strange noises on the ceiling day and night, and worst of all at night sometimes you couldn't even sleep, so I started to lock my window and door at night. I even went as far as putting a towel in the gap of the door and the floor. One evening my friend Freddie came over and we started having a pleasant conversation. He had brought over the daily newspaper and I was playing some music on my laptop. I heard my neighbor's dog whimpering, pretty odd since he was a pretty big dog. Well, there he was all balled up and whimpering, and then I heard it for the first time. There was this noise. It was like water or something more solid dripping, maybe slushing down the fence, and then it was quiet. I told Freddie to immediately close the door and I shut the window too, but right when I was doing so the lights went off. Then closely after the laptop followed. My laptop had been connected all day, so what happened to the battery? Well, we were left in utter darkness and we were scared. Then came a lady. Well, at least that's what I thought it was, because I heard heels clicking to my door and then it started knocking on my door. I was going to venture out when I remembered you needed keys to get into the place where I lived. There was a gate that had a lock, so this person/thing didn't belong here. Since I didn't answer the door, it started kicking the door, then it pushed the toes of the shoes under the door. It didn't stop there, it started scratching the door and banging away, and it lasted until 3 a.m. My friend couldn't leave, and at 3 a.m. there was a lady that started screaming his name 3 times, and then it stopped after that. I checked around and it turns out that the previous person in that room had been into pentagrams, witchcraft and all of that. Maybe that's what had triggered everything, I'm not sure. I know after that I had a couple strange things happen and I moved. I found out after I moved that the room I had been given was the only one at $30. I wonder if the owner knew.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.